Well, hello, everyone. Welcome to this panel, and also welcome to the second day of the summit. For those who weren't able to join yesterday, welcome to today. We're really excited about this panel, not just because of the discussion, but the really unique expertise that we have having this discussion. These people are both advocates, but they're also the people at the tip of the spear working through what this should look like and helping survivors. So please, when you have questions, submit them and I'll ask them as we can. I want you to have a deeper sense of what these individuals are working on in their orgs. So we'll start a little bit of a round robin on introductions. I'll go in the order that we have people presented. So first, I'd like to start with Dr. Ann Olivarius, please.
Yes, thank you. I'm a lawyer and I practice in the United States, in Ireland, and in Britain, and I have a law firm in those jurisdictions. When I was a student, being raped was every woman's own secret shame and our problem to solve. I'm 69 now. When we were seen as interlopers on campus. When I went to Yale, women had just been accepted full time and fair game to male students and our professors. In 1974, I was strangled and raped by a man who now is Dr. Calvin Hirsch, a fellow student. The police refused to investigate the incident. They refused to call it rape because we had previously been friends, and they said Hirsch could not have raped me. According to the police, Yale men, particularly white Yale men, did not rape or strangle. So that was that. Toward the end of my time at Yale, I was a lead plaintiff in a lawsuit called Alexander v. Yale, one of the first cases to utilize the concept of sexual harassment. In response to our suit, Yale University said that there was a strong argument that any female student who wasn't smart enough to escape an amorous professor wasn't smart enough to be at Yale. Back then, the problem was clearly women, not men violating women. To cut a long story short, the judge in that suit, Judge Ellen Burns, ultimately agreed with us, plaintiffs. She wrote, "It is perfectly reasonable to maintain that academic advancement conditioned upon submission to sexual demands constitutes sex discrimination in education." A few months later, another judge, Edward Lambard, affirmed the applicability of equal education laws to sexual harassment on campus. So for the first time, we created laws under civil rights laws in the United States and we talked about the term sexual harassment, which hadn't been discussed before. It wasn't a term anybody knew. So we essentially introduced this term. We said it's against the law if you have been sexually harassed. And we defined what sexual harassment was in education. I think of online harms in much the same way. This is a problem of equal access to the internet. The types of abuse we are talking about today are not equal opportunity harms. There is no doubt in my mind that women share a disproportionate risk from the digital age. I see signs of this every day in my legal practice, in the UK where I live, in the US where I do much of my work, and in Ireland. It is my belief that by allowing such clearly gendered online harms to continue, we are excluding women from online life. At the very least, we are telling women that putting up with dick pics and vicious abuse is the price they have to pay if they want to use the internet. Over the last 10 years or so of my career, I've turned to the problem of online harms more fully. I represented the YouTube celebrity Chrissy Chambers after her ex-boyfriend uploaded videos of her to a porn site. That case, which I took to the High Court in 2018, was the first of its kind to be brought under revenge porn, these laws in the UK. We created that law, or been instrumental in creating that law. I've also been active in this space politically on both sides of the Atlantic. I successfully lobbied for the introduction of Section 33 of the Criminal Justice and Courts Act of 2015, known as the UK's anti-revenge porn law. And last year, the then Lord Chancellor of the UK commented that I had been instrumental in making cyberflashing a crime in the United Kingdom. I've also worked with Congress in the US to introduce legislation. I should also say that I'm writing a book on this now, so I'm really interested in hearing how others on this panel are approaching the topic. And I would be especially interested in hearing any questions the audience may have. So in summary, this is a subject that concerns me deeply, both as a lawyer and as a campaigner for women's rights. When I started working on online harms, it was an issue almost no one over the age of 30 was familiar with. Of course, the problem has got a lot worse since, but I'm very pleased to see that awareness of the problem is entering the mainstream. This two-day event is a good indication of that, and I'm very pleased and honored to be a part of this panel with you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ms. Norma Buster.
Tough to follow that. That was such a great intro. And it's an honor to be here with all of you. And I want to thank My Image, My Choice, and all of the other organizers for putting this together. My name is Norma Buster. I'm the Chief of Staff at CA Goldberg, which is a victims' rights law firm in Brooklyn. And we have attorneys licensed in New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, California, and Pennsylvania. And our firm has been dealing with tech facilitated abuse since 2014 at its founding. Some of you might have watched my boss, Carrie Goldberg, speak earlier today about suing in general. And yeah, she started the firm in 2014. I met her in 2015 when I was 19 years old and became the victim of stalking and image-based abuse at the hands of my ex-boyfriend. And I'd gone to law enforcement by myself and had been turned away. And that's when my family found Carrie Goldberg and this firm. And so she was able to help me handle my case. And then a few years later, after I graduated from college, I joined the firm as client relations coordinator. And 6 years later, as of yesterday, I celebrated 6 years at the firm. I am also a loud and proud activist and advocate for sex positive victims' rights and the rights of sex workers. I am an online sex worker myself, and I also am the creator and host of Oral Arguments, which is a podcast all about sex, tech, and victims' rights. That's me.
Thank you. And we're going to switch over to Miss Jennifer Long.
Thank you, Payton, and also another hard act to follow. My name is Jennifer Long. I'm the CEO and co-founder of AEquitas. AEquitas is a nonprofit based in Washington, D.C. that's actually named after the Roman goddess for justice and equitable application of the law, the just application of the law. And it was created really in response to the shortcomings of the criminal justice system, serving for victims that are particularly open to victim blaming, to the minimization of crimes against them, and to unique harms. Those are victims of sexual violence, intimate partner violence, stalking, and human trafficking. And this subject touches all of those crimes and is a violent crime, as we'll talk about, although not always seen that way, right? As a former prosecutor, I saw these shortcomings firsthand, and it was what led us to co-found this organization, to really, when victims and survivors are brave enough to come forward and report, regardless of the victim blaming and culture, or when they are, when they come forward to testify, knowing that their world is going to be unraveled, the response was not adequate. And so AEquitas was created to really support prosecutors and prosecutors' offices in recruiting, retaining, and mentoring compassionate and highly skilled prosecutors who could improve the response of the criminal justice system to these crimes, respond to emerging issues, as well as keep institutional knowledge and build upon it. And we do our work in many different ways. We train, for example, we may train judges, juries, and we may train judges and prosecutors how to explain to fact finders the complexities of something like image-based sexual abuse, the tech that's involved in it, while still keeping the compassion and the recognition of the real and actual harm that these cause. We train law enforcement how to conduct trauma-informed interviews so that they are receiving the information that's important and keeping victims engaged and supported. And we host roundtables with prosecutors. We work in all the jurisdictions. Sometimes people are in U.S. jurisdictions are surprised to know that there are 58 U.S. jurisdictions, as well as internationally, to help prosecutors share strategies and information. And so we feel that these are crucial steps towards achieving justice. To give you some, background, I was a prosecutor in the Family Violence Sexual Assault Unit in Philadelphia long enough ago where we had intranet. The intranet was something that was, maybe some universities had it. It was certainly there, but we didn't have it. Many of our crimes were image-based abuse crimes were on Polaroid and other film, and they were filmed. Some of them film assaults. And so I think I come to this with a viewpoint of how the abuse is really constant, regardless of how the technology evolves. But this evolving technology requires us to really understand these issues. And just me coming to prosecution came from a place of working with victim advocates and survivors around domestic violence and sexual violence, and hearing the word, my prosecutor is good, my prosecutor is bad. And that really translated to me of when victims were being informed, when they were being spoken to respectfully, when they were being fought for in the courtroom, that was a good prosecutor. And so that's where I chose to try to make a difference on these crimes.
Thank you. We're going to get into a little questioning, but I may be a little provocative for those that are on the call and listening. And the reason why is you're dealing with experts here who are ins and out of the law. And we want this to be something that we're all able to help each other move forward. For those who don't know, I have been across this issue probably for 20 years before it was digital. I come from a DoD background. So I worked on these type of laws on the DoD side when it was military sexual assault in Congress and in real life. And then I've also worked in and out of tech companies and government. So I've been able to see how the law is applied or not applied at a tech company, but also being on the government side with the regulations. And both of those, the thread has been with a really victim-centered, survivor-centered approach to really understand. I think we're at an inflection point, and that's why I'm really excited to hear about this. Even today, a new bill was introduced that I was helping work on, the consent bill, and we're going to talk about some of the pros and cons of this legislation to see what our future should look like. With that, I think the first question is, we're talking about policymakers, but let's start one moment before that. We can go around Robin and answer the question is, can you expect someone to regulate something that they don't really know how it works? And when I say they don't know how it works, I'm talking about policymakers. So can they really do that? Or should really tech be the one doing the regulation because they know how it works? I think we'll go in same order for quick responses to that to set us up for the panel.
Well, all right. Who should regulate the internet? Should the internet be regulated? This is the issue. For years, for 5 years, we've had deep fakes, and policymakers have been aware of it. Those in the business have been aware of it, that of law and related issues, sex work, for everything. It's been on the internet for at least 5 years, the deep fakes, and nothing has been done. Essentially, we've given out warnings, but I would argue that because it was about women, and deep fakes are 99% about women and gendering of abuse towards women, nobody's done a damn thing. And now that it's a different world, because now the effect of falsity, of lies, of propaganda, of not knowing where truth lies on the internet, this is now, really, we're facing the loss of democracy. We're facing an election where people don't understand the truth, what is true or not. So it seems to me that, the First Amendment is going to have to be regulated. And I adore Danielle Citron, and I think what she's trying to do with the CDA, these are all little patches. These are things. The major issue has got to be tackled. We've got to come to terms with actually looking at the First Amendment and putting some restrictions on the First Amendment. It's like, blood and God. I mean, everybody says you can't touch the First Amendment. If we don't, then I would suggest our society is going to be destroyed for everything of the values that we hold dear. They say for the First Amendment, the restriction now is that if you go to a movie theater, you can't get up in the movie theater and say fire. You can't scream fire. That's against the law when there's not a fire. Okay, so what constitutes fire in our society today? And, what is the justification for limiting the First Amendment? It's harm. Fire equates to the harm that could be done to that crowd if you falsely claim fire. So on the internet, where is the line of harm on the internet? Where is the cause of fire? And I'd say the level of harm is catastrophic right now. Deepfakes and AI are there. Yes, towards women, of course, absolutely, but also towards our general policymaking and citizenship and democracy issues. Any civil society must have access to the truth. To have meaningful and productive relationships, we have to know what the truth is. And the internet is a sewer of lies, of propaganda. It undermines society, it undermines democracy on the most essential of levels. David Foster Wallace, you may recall this man, was a Rite Aid gifter. He ultimately committed suicide. But he wrote something about this is water. And the story is that the father fish goes up to two boy fish in the water and he says, "So how's the water?" And one boy fish turns to the other and says, "What is he talking about? Where's the water?" And the point of that story is that they're so bathed in water, they don't see it. We are so bathed as a society in lies and propaganda on the internet that you can't trust anything. And now with deepfakes, Payton, if you called me, I wouldn't know it was you. It could be anybody. It could be you, but it could be somebody else. So for civilization to continue, the one that we know, we're going to have to do something about disinformation, and we're going to have to clean that up. And it's not going to happen by just amending, the CDA, which is small beer compared to the extent of the problem. And in our world, what we're discussing today, porn has co-opted our sexuality. Porn creates a narrative that reinforces the patriarchy, control, and the humiliation of women. And this is what we teach our kids, and this is how our kids live. So we need to address serious issues, the regulation of the internet, if we're going to have a society going forward.
Well said. Norma, what say you?
Well, I think Annie mentioned something about porn. Was it porn that you were talking about, like kind of reinforcing these patriarchal
Narratives, yeah.
narratives? Yeah. And I don't agree with that as someone who is an online sex worker and advocates for sex workers' rights. But I will say mainstream porn, sure. But I think at the end of the day, this isn't about porn, and I don't even see this as a speech issue. I see it as abuse. To kind of go back to the original question that you asked, Payton, about like, should we let tech companies kind of regulate themselves because they know how they work? And I think if we let tech regulate themselves in a capitalist society, we'll never get any regulation. I mean, that's like, they're all about money. And beyond Section 230, I think we could be demanding that these companies have more morals and actually act to protect people. But I think that without some regulation from government, I don't see how we get there.
Jennifer, tech companies or
Yep.
policymakers regulation?
So, I mean, so two things. The first, just, the first part of your question talking about policymakers and if they don't have enough of the information or don't understand it. And I would say if you are representing a constituency, it is your obligation. If you're a prosecutor or you're running an office, it's your obligation to put people in place that have the understanding that they need to be able to address this. So for policymakers, if the individuals themselves don't have the experience, they certainly need to surround themselves with the experts to be able to provide the expertise and to show them what to read, what to listen to educate themselves. They can't abdicate that. So I feel like part of it is, first, we have a responsibility as the future evolves. Information, a lot of things evolve, and we educate ourselves about what we're interested in and what we think is important. And so if there are policymakers who don't feel that who feel like it should be abdicated to someone else, then maybe they're not seeing the importance and the urgency and the harm created by these crimes and necessitating that people develop the right expertise. In terms of regulating oneself, I mean, it's not really specific to the tech company. Any organization that's responsible for its own regulating, I mean, it's just human nature that they'll be self-service first. You see it with any organization that conducts internal investigations, no matter how well-intentioned. it's just never going to be objective. When you see bodies that are responsible for determining and adjudicating themselves, it becomes impossible. That's why we have, again, when they're working right in a prosecutor's office, you would never investigate something where you had a conflict of interest. You would send it off to another prosecutor's office that didn't have a relationship. If you were in a law enforcement office, you would never do an internal organization, an internal investigation with someone you knew. So you can't just give this over to an industry and trust. And again, it's not personal. It's just the way that things have to happen for transparency, for just, and to ensure there's no impunity, that there are outside people who are weighing in. Because the bottom line is, when we talk about expression, there are many people, Norma, on this call, there are people who are ready, willing, and able to express themselves in many different ways. This is not what we're talking about here. We're talking about specific choices to take people who are not consenting and to create material and to use it. And so the sad, ugly part of that is it is a very lucrative business. And whether we're talking about money or whether we're talking about the clout that may come along with being able to share these images, it's one that is rife for even corruption of the most, again, well-intentioned person. So I would say you need to have outside, but of course we want the people on the inside to be really thoughtful about the harms that can be created and to have, to be able to give insight and to give contributions.
So it's a full flush here of it's in their hands, policymakers and the people that they're accountable to. We're going to start Jennifer, and then we'll go back Norma and Anne. We're going to reverse order. Pivot back really closely on that is, why are you working on the prosecution of image-based abuse? I feel like there's things that are more harmful to women that are happening. Why are you focused on this?
So again, I think that's, that might be a chorus that we hear. And I think what we never want to do is get into a grading of harms. Certainly you can look at things that harm differently. One thing that's overlooked about the harm that happens in the digital space is how it is in perpetuity. I mean, all victims may continue to recall their abuse. This is something where not only you are recalling it, but it is out there so far out of your control because you don't know, even if it has been so-called taken down from some space, where it has been downloaded, where it'd be shared, where it will come back up again. So the harm psychological is significant in terms of loss and control, in terms of feelings of humiliate, whether right or wrong. But again, this is, when I say right or wrong, it's not about sex positivity or not. It's about individuals who had something happen to them that they did not consent to, whether it was creating consensual imagery and having it shared without their permission or having it created with AI and deepfake. And again, the act almost speaks for itself. We say our perpetrators don't have intent on their forehead, but we know their intent by their actions. And there's plenty of material, sexual material that is available that's consensually made. This is specifically created for the purpose of harm because they're targeting people who haven't consented. And so it's not only harmful towards a victim, but it's dangerous when we think about the perpetrators who are going to devote themselves to creating this type of content. And what we know from some of the, it's a little bit afield, but I think it's related. Some of the research that's been done, Julie Valentine has looked at the violence that's occurred when individuals meet in a dating app situations that sometimes not any individual, but a perpetrator who's using that vehicle. The tech does bring in very dangerous people who want to commit crimes. And so I think not only the images themselves, I think we don't want to minimize the harm. It is important, and we can do a lot of different things. It's all violent. It's all sexual violence, and it's related. But I think it also leads to other crimes, and we have to be thoughtful about that: the sexual exploitation, human trafficking, and stalking, cyber stalking, and intimate partner violence.
I hear you on the slippery slope argument there that it's a gateway. Norma, I'd be interested in your view, especially of a sex positive view. From your own words, sexual images don't lead necessarily to sexual violence, right? Because there's an industry there. But I'd be curious to hear your view on why this and not the other items that might be happening to women in or outside of the industry. Why focus time on this one?
I mean, I think maybe like 10 years ago, people used to think that online abuse wasn't real. And I think now we're in a different place where people can actually see the reputational damage, even if they're not thinking about like the emotional harms and like the mental health risks like PTSD, anxiety, depression, and suicide. The future earning potential, being ostracized from your community. I mean, we could go on and on about like the real life impacts, but since you asked about like the sex positivity, I mean, sex workers suffer from this too, and it's not only violating, but it also has an impact on their finances as well, just like any other victim of image-based abuse. Nowadays, we can't really separate the online from the offline. We know that online behaviors cause offline harms. And so I don't view image-based sexual abuse as something totally separate from other forms of sexual abuse. It's just tech was used as a weapon.
Fair. And Anne?
Well, of course, you know, I practice as a women's rights lawyer. We do discrimination law, we do divorce law, we do revenge porn law, whatever it is, we're in there trying to protect women. We represent a lot of sex workers. We're really there at the crossroads. We're fighting, we try to fight the good fight. But deep fakes and AI, they eradicate two intractable problems. We're trying to eradicate misogyny and violence against women. And if you tackle it online, you have a chance maybe of doing something about it. As Norma was saying, you know, we have women who come in who didn't consent to any of this. Their pictures are available online. They can't get a job. They can't keep a job. They're ridiculed at work. You know, their lives are totally destroyed. And this is not a joke. We've had a lot of parents come in and tell us that their daughters have committed suicide. And I mean, a lot of cases of this because of the humiliation that they've been put through on this. Now, I'm going to give you a sex positive story, though. We had a woman some years ago before deepfakes became rampant, and she came to us, a beautiful, gorgeous woman from the Middle East. And she said that she was married to a doctor. She was living in northern England, and she'd become bored by him. It was an arranged marriage, and so she'd had a number of affairs. And so she said this, and she said, and there were some boudoir pictures taken, which at that time was considered the code word for, you know, some shots of her. And the boudoir pictures that she then gave me had some, you know, sort of gauze in front of them. But these were the most beautiful pictures I've ever seen. She was gorgeous, just stunning. Nothing was left to the imagination. So her husband had found these, realized that this is with other men, and he became very unhappy. So he started threatening all sorts of bad behavior, and she fled back to the Middle East, to her home country. And so she's calling me about what we're going to do with this. This is before now the real ramp up of deepfakes. And, you know, she said, I've really got a problem because in this country, I will be killed. I will be stoned to death. I'll be killed. Absolutely. And so she's on the phone with me, and her father comes running into the room, screaming, upset. He had just seen the pictures. The husband had just sent the pictures to the father. And she, without a hesitation, bless her soul, said, excuse me. She said, Anne, hold on. She turned to her father and she said, Dad, these are not me. These pictures are not me. Now, these pictures were utterly her, let's be clear. But she was ahead of the game. And she looked and she was so convincing. She said, look, this is my nasty husband. And he's just decided to humiliate me. But none of this is true. This is just a fiction. And the father, of course, stopped and said, that mean husband of yours, I'm going to kill him. So, okay, the killing intent changed from her to the husband. But I thought to myself, in a way, deepfakes is a good excuse for a lot of women who are placed in these circumstances because they want to or not, and who want to get out of them. And so in a way, there's a positive story there, that who's going to believe that this is actually the woman who it's alleged to be, because it could be anybody. So maybe that's a good thing.
That's
maybe the only good thing you could say.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing you bring up, and we'll start with you again and go back around. Let's talk about, I'm going to combine kind of two thoughts here, is should the focus be on AI as the technology for this harm? And the reason why I ask that is it's AI today. What is it tomorrow? Wearables? Is it a hologram? Right. And so I asked that and I'll add the second part of the question so they can be combined, should we be working on deepening current laws, harassment, stalking, that already exist, or working to create laws explicitly with the term AI or image in it? It's a current kind of debate, right? You've got some people who are like, why are we creating all these new laws? And then you've got other people like to be called out explicitly. So Anne, I'll start with you and we'll go back around.
Now, the old laws or the current laws about harassment and rape and sexual assault, rape is a free crime in the United States. Go ahead, do it. Who cares? Nobody's going to prosecute it. You're not going to, somebody's not going to jail on it. It's so rare, unless you do it in public and it's a nun and she's screaming, no, 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 and you've got 5 witnesses, forget it. I make somewhat of an extreme case, of course, but it's a free crime. And in my experience, most women have been sexually assaulted or raped in this country. It's such a common phenomenon. Women don't talk about it in the same way, though. More so now. But where we used to have men come in who have been accused of rape, where they used to deny it, now, of course, they'll say, yes, it was consensual, it happened. And then they always add this piece in, oh, and she enjoyed it, as if they were so good. So, I mean, we don't have any prosecution of these crimes. These are all free crimes, essentially. So I don't have any faith in the current situation. And it's not just AI, the laws have to change as life changes. And I think fundamentally, to go back to my initial point, the First Amendment has to be addressed. We have to think about what should we do about the First Amendment and free expression. What is free expression if over half the population can be abused at will, and who can suffer the loss of jobs, suffer loss of livelihood, their whole online persona is destroyed? What kind of a society is that? We need to think through. But our founding fathers, and they are fathers who decided on those things, are not necessarily relevant in some areas today. It's time to have a deeper think about what is our society value, and then are we going to enforce the laws that we create? So far, we're not enforcing those laws.
The untouchable First Amendment. Norma?
Well, speaking of the First Amendment, I think there's this is why I don't really think of it as a First Amendment issue personally, because I see it as abuse is not speech. And so we're not limiting speech. We're talking about creating boundaries around what speech is versus abuse. And Marianne Franks has talked about how the lack of First Amendment boundaries, let's say, and I don't know the exact word she uses, but creates a chilling effect on the most marginalized people. And who are the most marginalized? We're talking people of color, queer people, sex workers, disabled people, etc. But to answer the question about should we be making new laws, amending laws, it depends on what we're talking about, right? So in 1990, we had our country's first anti-stalking law passed. So that was obviously a new law we needed to create. We needed those stalking laws. When our firm started in 2014, there were really only 3 laws in place that criminalized the dissemination of private images. And New Jersey had its invasion of privacy law written in a way that was able to cover image-based sexual abuse before image-based sexual abuse was even a thing. And so the law was written in a way that could look ahead. So I think we need to think about that. But then also, in New York, we had our law criminalizing image-based sexual abuse passed in 2019. It took years for us to get there. But last year, the New York image-based abuse law was amended to expand the definition of what that kind of content is to include deepfake abuse images or videos. And so what our firm, as we advocate for legislation being passed, we found that it's easier to get lawmakers to agree to amending, making little tweaks to laws, as opposed to reinventing the wheel and creating something totally new.
Helpful perspective, especially very well know this path that you're both talking about, having to work with legislators and try to amend that. Jennifer, from a prosecutor, teeth.
Sure, from a prosecutor, yeah,
What's your view?
yeah, there's, I
Who
mean,
has to do something with said law?
exactly. I mean, I first want to just reply to something that Dr. Olivarius said. I mean, as a prosecutor in the space, of course, I'm not happy with how sexual violence is being responded to. We've read the attrition studies. I suspect for jurisdictions that have been brave enough to take them and look in their own jurisdictions and find out what they're doing, that's incredible. For the ones who haven't looked, I imagine they might find the same thing. So we have to get better in that. But I still stand from a place, I come from a place where we are lucky enough to work with people across the country and even in the world who do take these crimes seriously and do believe in achieving justice for the victims. With respect to the Constitution, I don't believe it's a choice between the Constitution and countering tech facilitated abuse and image-based abuse. I think that that is something that people throw up as an easy shield. They try to divert attention away from what is actually happening, which is an exploitation, a harm, again, creation and dissemination of a very harmful image that is another type of rape for an individual. It's just another way of broadening. And I think, again, something that generationally we may not understand, but different generations, their way their lives are online, that online presence, and this has even been documented in studies beyond the United States, can feel as real as the real life presence. So I think, one thing we just have to remember is that how to expand our understanding of the harm. But I think that there are times when the Constitution is, constitutional rights are limited when there are harms. And we see this across the criminal justice system. You have rights to due process and confrontation as a defendant unless you forfeit those rights by your own harm and wrongdoing. There are limits on the First Amendment. So I think anyone who tries to say that you can't regulate this because of First Amendment, anyone who's arguing that, I think that that can be dismantled. We do stand, because EQUITAS is more about putting the laws on the books in action. That's really the space that we work in. But just in looking at different ways over the last decades where laws have been adjusted, I guess here are some perspectives that kind of, come off of what's already been said. I think where a law exists that may cover the crime, we as prosecutors have to use those laws while they're implementing specific laws. And then if there's a question about, do we create new laws or do we amend existing laws? I think survivor voice is very important. Naming things is important. From a practical perspective, we might think about what is the law not covering comprehensively all of these harmful acts? Because if it isn't, we have to create laws, whether it's new or amendments, they have to do that. And when we're thinking about it, sometimes when we create new model laws and try to pass them, in the process of getting them passed, the deal making that goes on, sometimes what you have to give away in getting your law passed can be pretty significant. So strategically, it might make sense to just look at what's there and amend it. And I leave that for the people who are in the space, probably the people on this call, not me, who work on drafting legislation and having it passed, moving forward policy. I think you're all in the best position to make those assessments, but that's my view on it.
I really appreciate this robust discussion because laws are being written, as I mentioned, even today, they're being introduced, and this nuance is so important. And I really think it's important for everyone who's a part of this, from the advocates, survivors, et cetera, to realize that aspect of it. It's not a perfect science at all. I want to lift up Natalie Mathis in the chat, going back to the First Amendment. She wrote, and it's an excerpt of what she wrote. She wrote, on the one hand, moderating CSAM, child sexual abuse material content online is in the technical sense censorship, but of course it is. But is it censoring speech or is it censoring abuse? And so that pegs back and forth of what we were saying here in that discussion. Since we're getting into kind of the difficult part of this, let's just ask a kind of heated question. You're kind of two types of laws right now that are in vogue. Doesn't mean that they're always going to be in vogue. Just like Jennifer, and the team here have said, is just sometimes just what is currently passable with the people who are at hand, what our knowledge base is and where we are culturally in a cultural context, right? Dr. Olivarius talked about, like, in our lifetime, rape wasn't even something that could be done unless it was on the street or in a public. If you were in a relationship with someone, if you went on a date with them, if you knew them, and didn't exist, right? So the norms have changed. So where we currently are, and that's why I'm caveating that, doesn't mean that's where we're going to stay, is you have a private right of action as a tool, i.e., a person who feels like an infraction against them can sue, go to civil court and sue. And then you've got criminal, right, where a prosecutor is criminalizing that. Heated, would love to know your opinions either way on these. And I'm going to start with Norma, break up the system a little bit. Then we'll go to Dr. Olivarius and then Jennifer. Olivarius and then Jennifer. Norma.
Okay. Well, first I should clarify also that I'm not an attorney. So I work at a law firm, but I'm not an attorney. But part of my work is to meet with potential clients every day. And so I've met with thousands of victims of online and offline abuse throughout my time at the firm. And one part of my job that can be a little bit trickier, heavier, is setting realistic expectations. And so a lot of the times people will say, like, they want to see, their case taken seriously. They want law enforcement to act. And part of my role is letting them know, like, hey, our attorneys can advocate on your behalf, but like, we can't force prosecutors to prosecute. They have discretion. Oftentimes, myself included, when I was going through it, people go to the precinct and they're met with complete lack of empathy or understanding of tech and of trauma. So although I think criminal laws are really important, along with a cultural shift to make like the changes that we want to see, I also tell people, like, we can't really rely on the criminal justice system always. And so where the criminal justice system might fail, the civil justice system can put the power back in the survivor's hands. So that's when the survivor is in the driver's seat, getting their day in court. Of course, the defendant needs to have money to pay the survivor if we're gonna have like a successful outcome. And I know Carrie Goldberg probably talked a lot about this in her talk earlier today. But it gives us the ability to redistribute the wealth a little bit. And, we believe that if somebody hurts you, someone must pay. And the civil justice system helps us do that. And, money will never take away someone's trauma. It'll never change what happened to them, but it can make life a little more comfortable.
Yeah. On to you, Dr. Olivarius.
The Johnny Depp Amber Heard trial, it was a big thing. First in England, and of course in England, Johnny Depp was found guilty of 12, I think, acts of domestic abuse, violence, by a very esteemed judge, Judge Nicol, and the opinion was very thoughtfully written. And then he went to America, of course, and brought another suit, and he prevailed there. Now, as a lawyer, I would criticize how the judge handled that and the system there, and it was a shocking outcome, I think, when already we had proof certain that he was a domestic abuser. Okay, so that I found around everywhere I traveled in the States. People say now about Amber Heard, I hear it all the time, well, Amber Heard, she's not a very nice person anyway, and I didn't really watch the trial, but she's really kind of nasty. You hear versions of this all the time. And this is the power of a very, wealthy man who allegedly put $80 million into social media bots and attacking her very successfully online. And he was able to get the outcome he wanted from this. So we have this tool that wealthy men use, which is a defamation claim. They come right back at you for all sorts of stuff if you bring a claim of harm, online harm, or, on the street harm. You get it. And then, of course, if you happen to have not a lot of money, but, some woman has claimed something against you, then you can organize doxing her and going after her with all such abusive tactics, on the internet. So the fight back is really tough. California is the only place I know now that's got a new law on defamation that if a woman brings a claim, even if she loses it, if the man can prove she brought it maliciously and it was false, then okay, he gets damages. But if that barrier cannot be reached, it's a high bar, then in fact, he cannot bring a defamation claim against her. And then if he does, then he'll have to pay her and also her attorneys. And there's a treble damages award there. So I think there's one action there that has made a lot of potential good. It's just going into effect. But we have a problem because we're stifled. We're told to shut up. And if we don't shut up and bring our claims forward, then they're going to get us either through a defamation claim or a tortious interference claim, or of course, you just get you online. So this is a real problem, and deepfakes are a great tool. You just get her image and throw some naked stuff on, about her to her body, and you try to harm her personally and defame her. So we need other tools. One of the things our law firm is thinking of doing is setting up something called The True, a website where you could tell your story and you name your rapist, because that's the problem. Women now, I find, who come in with complaint all the time will name their rapist, but they don't want to do so in a court case. They'll say, well, I want justice. I want him brought to task. I don't want to destroy him. I don't want to hurt him that much. You often hear that kind of forgiveness in women, but it's really tough to get them to go forward in that sense. So I think that there are other ways, certainly if you've been online porned, you've been revenge porned, if you know who that is, most of those guys are, creepy who do this stuff, or their new girlfriends do it, for instance, to the old girlfriend. And I think if you name them online, name them and identify them, then you have to name them, shame them. And that's how you address the problem in a real, tangible, streetwise kind of way. We need to get some of those kinds of possibilities protected so that, it used to be the women's bathroom stall. You'd say, stay away from, Jim Jones, and women would write in. We need to do something online about that and not have to suffer more abuse and lawsuits and claims against us because we're telling our truth online. And I would hope that we can get something like that legislatively passed.
The defamation angle is really interesting. Jennifer?
I think I'm in line a lot with what's already been said, what Norma was saying about both sides. I do believe in the criminal justice system, even with its shortcomings right now. And I think that having a criminal law that says this act causes significant harm that rises to the criminal level, and that we're going to bring these charges in a forum for all victims. We're not going to determine which victims are deserving of this, because all the victims are deserving of this. And I think that that's a message that the criminal justice system can bring. How it treats survivors in the courtroom is a message for the community that these crimes are important, that they're harmful, that victims deserve to be treated with respect, all victims, that they deserve a voice, and that they deserve to have someone elevate that voice in a place where defendants' rights are protected. They have representation, there is due process. But as prosecutors, we demonstrate the significant harm caused and we hold them accountable so that there's no impunity. Having said that, I do also believe in a civil course of action. I know that, that exists in so many places in the law. There's criminal assault, and then there's torts, assault, sexual violence. Victims are come to us as they are willing and able to do what they are willing and able to do in their process. And I'm committed to building a criminal justice system that victims would want to choose and we would want to go forward. But for those that want other avenues, this should be available to them as well.
And let's talk about, we're talking about the policy aspects of the tech. So the policy, they're not just discussing the tech, they're talking about the action, right? And, here we're talking about deepfake. So we have a few minutes and I want to, very succinctly hear your thoughts on amending Section 230 of the 1996 Communications Decency Act. Everyone who's familiar with this, we do, short term 230, CDA 230, but just longer form for what that is. It provides immunity to online platforms from civil liability based on third-party content. In short, it protects any platform, and would want to know what your thoughts are. Does that need to be amended to help with this deepfake issue, or is it just being misused and misinterpreted and we need to put just more enforcement? Jennifer, start with you and we'll quickly go because we're nearing time.
Sure, I know this is a lightning piece and, we're not in the legislative piece. So I would just say this, any law that gives impunity to actors who might be profiting off of or creating harm should be looked at in terms of if that's, we would look at any industry. And if there was any industry where people were actively harming and that was maybe a core part of their industry, then that would have to be looked at differently. So, I mean, we don't get involved in legislation, so I don't mean to be being cagey. I would just say that's an important piece because no one should have impunity from harm and violence in this realm.
Thank you. Norma?
Yeah, our firm has been talking about Section 230 since the inception of our firm. And, we were talking about image-based abuse and asking like, why is nobody talking about this law? And it's pretty interesting to see today that it's become the topic of, conversations in DC and global summits. Tech companies have been using Section 230 as a get out of jail free card. The way I put it is any other industry in the United States, if you're harmed by a company, then you can have your day in court to hopefully try to remedy the situation. And the tech industry is the only one where we don't have the opportunity to have our day in court. So I think it's really an access to justice issue. But our firm in particular has been finding ways to engage in the footholds where Section 230 doesn't apply. So like we took the platform Omegle out of commission using product liability theory. Platforms have the right to take down content or keep it up. So that's like there's no ambiguity there. But that doesn't mean that there are other things that we can't be looking at. Our attorneys are also looking at, whether Section 230, if there's liability for the distributors like the Apple Store or Google Play, where you can download these apps that are used to create abusive material, deepfake abuse material. And so our attorneys have found that like through our lawsuits against Amazon, for example, for knowingly selling a chemical that was being used by kids for suicide, there's no Section 230 immunity on seller negligence. So this could potentially extend to the App Store marketplaces where the products being used to create deepfakes are being sold.
And Dr. Olivarius?
Yeah, Section 230 was put together 24 years ago, and it was done hurriedly in a way that people didn't understand the power of the internet. It was early days. Now, in Britain, we've been working hard on getting a new online harms bill passed. We've had it passed, and it was beautiful. At first, I thought we really were going to change the world because you could make things restrictive in Europe. Then, of course, the Americans would have to respond, and I thought we had a better chance of doing that. And then, of course, Zuckerberg pitches up and all the power of the tech firms get involved, and it's very tough to defeat that kind of moneyed interest. And that's the problem. A very small group of people run the United States in these things, and they run the world. And defeating them, it's almost impossible. Carrie Goldberg's firm, bless you, Norma. I mean, she's brilliant. She's got courage. I love that woman. She's terrific. Payton, what you've done at Bumble, weren't you like the first ones to be able to say when dick pics went across on a dating site, Bumble, you said, nope, we're not going to get dick pics. You're off. Bless you for that. We have the technology available. It's not tough to say, that's actually male genitalia. We're not going to have it. It's not hard. We hear, oh, it's so tough. It's tough. It's not. The problem is there's so much money in the sex industry used to abuse women. It's rampant. And nothing's going to get done, I think, until we really look at the potential loss of democracy that, if you're listening to the presidential election and debates and what's happening, it's terrifying of what's at stake right now. It's no more, good Republicans that may disagree a few things with the Democrats. No, these are really serious, life-changing, possible life-destroying issues that are at base now. And the internet is very much a part of them.
All right, and just with the last minute, one sentence, survivors on the call want to know, what do they do if it happens to them? What's your suggestion? So just like a one sentence succinct you know, with how everything is up in the air now, I'm just going to go, Jennifer, we'll start with you, but round robin, they want to know, like, what's just one sentence if this happens to them, like, what should they be thinking or do? Jennifer.
Report, hold your law enforcement and prosecutors accountable to respond to you in any way that they have to.
Thank you. Norma.
Screenshot, document, find your support system and look into the laws in your state. Potentially find lawyers in your state you can talk to.
Last but not least.
Yeah, well, I mean, if you want to call a lawyer, we get free consultations. Carrie does too. I know that, you know, there are a bunch of people working in this area. Find out what your rights are. You know, if you don't want to do it yourself by trolling through the internet, call a lawyer and, you know, for free, we'll tell you what your options are. Sadly, they're not many, but you know, there are some.
All right, well, ladies, thank you so much for your time. It is such a star panel here, and I respect so much the work that you and your organizations are doing, and especially shining the light, being in the advocacy space along with you, but also being on the prosecutor side. I just really have a lot of admiration, and it's clear from the text messages and the questions that are coming through this. We're all in this together, and thank you for that last bit of advice. And with that, I would end the call, and we'll see everyone on the other side.
Thank you.